Back live with you tonight, John in Focus, and thanks for staying on. Technical issues and ongoing negotiations with lenders were the reason government could not provide details on its planned takeover of Eskom debt. Minister Enoch Gondongwana told reporters after tabling the medium-term budget speech that government planned to take over up to 2/3 of the power utility Eskom, the debt of 400 billion rands. Meanwhile, embattled state-owned enterprises Sanral, Denel and Transnet will become beneficiaries of several multi-billion bailout packages. Joining us now to share his reaction to the medium-term budget speech is South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry CEO, Alan Mukoki. Good to have you with us, and thank you very much for your time. First, the issue of turning the debt at Eskom into sovereign debt. I mean, how important is that for Eskom, and what does it really mean in terms of giving Eskom room to breathe?
Well, good evening to you and your listeners. I think that is an important development, purely because we know that Eskom has actually struggled under the weight of this massive debt. As you know, there's only two ways to run a business. You either attack the revenues or you attack costs. And in this particular regard, if you are going to be carrying a heavy burden of more than 400 billion worth of debt, the cost of that particular debt will weigh down any revenues that you're generating. So you only have other options. You're either going to increase revenues by asking and always charging much more higher than average tariffs in respect of what the electricity consumption people are paying you. And that's not sustainable in the context of Eskom. As we know, we complain all the time as business that the tariff increases are much more higher because they are generally way above inflation. So to that extent, we would want to see a situation, not that the state should be overburdened with this new debt, that at least if you stabilize the energy supply environment and you keep costs much more lower, that will generate higher levels of productivity, certainty, investment. People can now with confidence go on to put in new plant and equipment to drive their businesses to grow, and that in effect will have the effects of generating more revenue to the fiscals by way of the three taxes, whether it's personal income tax, corporate income tax, and other indirect taxes. So hopefully that debt will find a place in the government's books where sufficient of the revenues being generated by taxes will be able to deal with it over a long-term period.
Yeah. We still don't have sight of what the conditions are that they are, of course, going to put in place, depending on what model and funding they are going to be looking at. But if you were Treasury, what sort of conditions do you put to this kind of bailout?
Well, I think that the basic conditions is what we as SACIs have articulated, and I think that the President referred to that in his speech the other night in terms of building a meritocracy where the selection, appointment and recruitment of people who are working in these SOEs must be very clearly defined. We need to know a very clear process of how we are going to do that. The new board has been put together today. We don't want to be lucky, in other words, if we are likely to put in a new board today, but tomorrow we don't have a very established clear process in terms of a template for appointment and recruitment. And I think that the President alluded to the very fact that we've raised that you need to create an independent structure that will then look at how you recruit, how you select, how you retain people who are going to go into that particular environment. And they have to be people of very high skills, competencies, and a proven performance track record. If you don't do that, it really doesn't matter what conditions you put on the table, because businesses are run by people, businesses are run by the culture that exists in that particular organization, and businesses are run by the value system that actually exists. And if you combine those three things together, right people, right skills, right values, right culture, then you can have an opportunity to say any condition that you want to put on the table can be fulfilled. Otherwise, it would just end up being a pipe dream, because it's not the first time that the government has spoken about conditions that must be met in terms of bailing out SOEs. They've done that all the time. There's nothing new. So the only thing that we say should be new is what the President also referred to the other night in terms of build a clear structure on your meritocracy, and then the rest shall follow, and that's the only way you run a business.
Yeah. So would you say the Finance Minister is in the right direction when he says one of the additional conditions is that the conditions will be informed by a Treasury-led independent review of Eskom's operations, in particular the performance of its generation fleet? So there'll be some independent body that is going to advise Treasury on this.
Well, there has to be an independence, because I don't think that you hire people to work at National Treasury on the basis of their high skills in the space of corporate governance and in the space of being corporate executives in operational environments. Treasury deals with a lot of things. They can't be experts in airlines, experts in logistics and Transnet, experts in energy. You're not necessarily going to have those particular skills within National Treasury. And I think that National Treasury themselves, they need to be fair to themselves and not give to themselves a task that they themselves would not necessarily be competent in handling. So you need to have independence, because independence allows you to get the right level of expertise to assist you in that level of decision making, so that the judgment piece is not necessarily faulty from that particular point of view. So we welcome that idea of a review, but it cannot be done by National Treasury. There are certainly no skills in National Treasury that can run a very major business like Eskom, or monitor whether the people who are actually running it are actually doing a good job.
Has it done enough to address the risk at Sanral? Because the road network needs to operate, not only that, but the ports as well needs to begin to function in terms of interventions there in the medium to long term.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you're not just going to be able to resolve the issue of Sanral if you're not actually resolving the issue of the ports, the rail network, and what's happening when the goods land at the port itself in terms of the expertise that we need to have. We've been doing this for centuries now. South Africa is surrounded by two seas, the Indian and Atlantic Ocean. There's absolutely no reason why a big industrializing country like South Africa should not be one of the best, maybe top 5 or something like that in the world in terms of how we handle things like ports, rail infrastructure, logistics, etc. We are now going ahead and we're doing this Africa free trade agreement, and a lot of our neighboring countries are landlocked, and they're going to be relying on South Africa's capabilities to be able to move their goods. And that level of expertise is something that is non-negotiable. So we need to be able to import the skills. We need to be able to put in the right people into things and not make politically based appointments, whatever we want to choose to call it. So we need to be very clear in terms of that particular template. South Africa's problems are not insurmountable in terms of whether they can ever be resolved. They are all based on whether we've created a culture that can hire and retain the right people and create the right environment. And I'm glad what the president also said the other day, that we're going to get ministers to come out of sitting on tender committees, or even board members to sit on tender committees, because it's part of the problem that has created so much noise in the governance environment, and then affects the operations, because people then want to go and find someone who is weak, who's not the strongest, to get into that role, because they will then be able to look the other way if you want a particular tender. So you need to fix that entirety of a process around people's skills, culture, and values, and then we can have an opportunity to fight and fight to win.
In terms of the modernization of the procurement processes and what needs to be done there, is that the kind of intervention, I suppose, that would begin to bring the kind of growth that you want to see, particularly in the small business sector, and opening up those barriers that are making it hard for that segment to begin to grow?
Well, absolutely, and it's not just in the area of procurement. We need to really drive the idea of small business development. If we look at the countries that we would like to benchmark ourselves against, these are the countries, maybe 8 or so of them, that have managed to move their economies from developing to developed economies. And you count amongst those Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, old Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, Israel, and yes, Russia. And what they actually did manage to do is to build a very strong meritocracy, because you can then begin to start to say you can resolve all these beautiful things that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are actually talking about. We, of course, in South Africa talk about the triple challenge of poverty, inequality, and unemployment, but we should be able to add into that category nutrition, good health and well-being, universal access to good health, universal access to high-quality education that is free, by the way, because unless you create that level of access that is free, that isn't necessarily based on what your income level is or your parents' income level is, we're not necessarily going to build a critical mass of high skills in the broad society so that you can drive the agenda for significant growth and development over the next 20 or maybe 30 years. So to that extent, you need to have a combination of all those factors working together in unison so that you can have that level of an agenda that says we can now grow sustainably over many years as much as all these other countries that I've just mentioned have actually managed to do and solve these big problems that we're actually talking about.
Alan Mukoki, much appreciated. Thanks for coming on tonight on In Focus. CEO of SACHI there, helping us in that conversation, the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry.